This video is brought to you by Surfshark. Stick around to hear more about the discount that they're providing to the entire upper echelon community. What are video games? For most, it's simply a collection of digital imagery and interactive coding that lets you escape into a fictional universe. For others, it's an artistic medium with unlimited narrative potential. But for some, video games are dangerous, they are oppressive, and they are capable of warping the very fabric of our societal norms in a way that requires governmental intervention. I've talked about this topic many times in the past, but I typically focus almost entirely on the clinical aspect of video games and violence. The premise is pretty simple here. By all available metrics and scientific documentation, video games do not cause violent behavior. There is an abundance of information on that subject to be found online, there is published research from a number of credible sources, and there is an overwhelming amount of data which will debunk and subsequently thoroughly embarrass that claim for anyone interested in exploring the information. However, that's not how I want to handle things today, because debunking, for a fourth, fifth time, I don't know, I've lost track, the claim that video games cause violence has no apparent effect on those that seek to have them censored, deplatformed, banned, or removed, and the calls for 6 days in Fallujah, the latest target of the mob, to be stricken from the online world, are not slowing down. If anything, they are simply gaining traction.
Okay, pause. I talk a lot these days about privacy, censorship, and data protection. On the one hand, much of what we do online is by definition unsecured, but on the other, there can be very simple steps to remedy those issues. Surfshark, a VPN, is one such step to take. Surfshark has a multitude of different uses. For starters, you can bypass regional censorship at will by flipping your geographic location. On top of that, you can circumvent region-specific licensing agreements and access a greater amount of online video content, sites like Netflix, for one. And still further, you can protect yourself from big tech data harvesting, which allows you to maintain a significantly greater degree of privacy while browsing online. The combined effects of a VPN are incredibly valuable in the modern tech world, and I've used it for over a year and I'll continue to do so because it's that good. I'm happy to say that Surfshark is offering 83% off and 3 full months free if you click the link down below in the description and use promo code Echelon. Again, that's 83% off and 3 full months free using the link down below and code Echelon. Big thank you to them for sponsoring the channel.
So what is there to say and why am I making the video? Simple. 6 days in Fallujah has become a focal point in what can only be described, in my opinion, as a cultural war of words and definitions. Let me explain, because that's a rather intense claim. If I tell you that I want to abolish journalism, one might reasonably expect that I want to eliminate and or obstruct the journalistic field entirely to a point of total irrelevance. My words are saying, I want this thing to stop existing, but if I were to then be met with fierce and unflinching pushback to that idea, I might rethink that strategy. Well, what if I then decide to pivot and say that abolish doesn't mean what abolish really means, but instead I've decided that abolishing journalism actually means ensuring that certain articles, subjectively and personally defined articles, aren't allowed to be published at all. That's not what abolish means. The definitive and widespread understanding of that word revolves around a premise of ending something, usually with absolute permanence, and my endeavor to abolish journalism becomes doublespeak. My meaning, which is not factually, literally, or grammatically accurate at all, is now completely different by definition than what I am actually saying, and the result is that common understanding of critical issues can begin to fall apart. How about an even better example here? The word censorship is often misused. It's a word that quite literally means suppression of speech, public communication, or other information, which may be done on the basis that such material is considered objectionable, harmful, sensitive, or inconvenient. Censorship can be conducted by governments, private institutions, and other controlling bodies. Let's imagine that I want the United States government, or the United Nations as an example, to strike down Kotaku. My reason is that they have produced articles that are insensitive to the plight of certain YouTubers and or developers, with lasting damage caused in terms of career advancement or personal growth. I decide to create a petition calling on sovereign governments and international committees to ban the website from publishing their content. But when I am rightly criticized for my censorious agenda, I decide to use some doublespeak. It's not censorship. I just want the government to ban a few articles because their articles censor the voices of the developers and creators that they talk about by only telling half the story. They don't make enough of an effort to get all sides of the truth or tell things from my perspective, thereby censoring me, even though I didn't say a single thing. So it's not censorship for me to call on the government or global allied powers to ban their content. That is effectively what is happening here with 6 days in Fallujah, only it's exponentially worse. The game itself is not exactly an industry milestone, at least it's incredibly unlikely that it will be when it eventually hits the market. The concept was originally started back in 2009, scrapped in 2012, and rebooted much later with a different developer with a now slated 2021 release date. It's a tactical shooter, which, if we're being honest, are a dime a dozen these days. This game is not going to revolutionize the industry, and aside from what appears to be a somewhat innovative reliance on procedural generation, there is little in the way of unique mechanics. However, unlike many other titles these days, it is based on actual, historical, real-world conflict. That is where the controversy is originally born. In an attempt to avoid triggering the YouTube algorithm here, I will surmise the events as a door-to-door depiction of an actual urban battle in a very real war. Here's where the activists spin off in random directions like race car tires without lug nuts and all of an equivalent level of intelligence compared to a piece of rubber. Because it is based on real-world events, and because those real-world events were tragic, which they were, the game can't be shown, because it's going to glorify tragedy, and that glorification will marginalize specific groups, and thus this game must be completely deplatformed. Leading the charge are a number of industry figures, such as Rami Ismail, but more importantly, the advocacy has grown outward and now reaches organizations like CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. Furthermore, there has been an absolute tidal wave of support for this cause from what now appears to be hundreds of individual developers, project leads, composers, you name it, all across the industry. There are even claims like this one from Alana Pierce, which reads, quote, "I was advised not to cover the issues with this game because it could threaten my visa status. It sucks that the Rami had to take on the onus himself, but I'm glad he did. This video is an informative watch, as is the rest of the Twitter thread." End quote. We are somehow now in a world where the United States government is watching a Twitter thread about a beleaguered video game and will then revoke visas if foreign journalists decide to talk about it? Yeah, no. She might have been told that, she might have believed that even, but there is no world in which 6 Days in Fallujah or its connected industry management have the raw political power in this country to revoke visas. Much less, if they did have that power, the unimpeachable stupidity required or the unbelievably mundane life and circumstances to actually use it in that way. Bottom line, there is a massive swell in industry support for the cause of deplatforming and banning 6 Days in Fallujah from ever being allowed to enter the market. Kotaku has gotten on board with a clearly biased write-up which claims that, quote, "not selling the game on PlayStation, Xbox, or Steam is a step in the right direction," end quote. Houston Press has called the game a murder simulator, which by itself could apply to almost every tactical shooter on the entire market in the first place. And most interestingly, there was a petition created by one Hala Al-Saman, which directly stated that the game would, quote, "breed a new generation of mass shooters in America," end quote. The thing is, that's not exactly a new claim. In fact, that's a fairly common attack vector from the media toolkit when addressing entertainment products that they disagree with. Harken back to Joker and the ensuing panic over white male incel crime, which never actually materialized. It's an easy thing to do. A movie or a video game is on the horizon. It happens to contain aspects of its story or subject matter, generally speaking, that can be twisted into an accusation of bigotry or some sort of ism, phobic, you name it. And once that has circulated for a few days and or weeks, you call for it to be banned, citing public safety as a primary factor. Well, that is exactly what has happened here with 6 Days in Fallujah. The petition is still garnering signatures, up over 16,000, I believe. Industry figures are still talking about it. But even after many thousands of activists jumped on board initially, the petition was actually updated to remove that claim from its description. This requires an entirely new set of questions like why and how does a petition get changed after already receiving support and tons of signatures? Is that abusable? Is that common? Why is something in the description removed only after becoming a focal point for critics? However, most importantly, this indicates that once again, much like doublespeak or specific definitions, there is a cold, calculated atmosphere of manipulation at work. Once this line was removed, the counterattacks began. One in particular, just as an example, took aim at Sophia Narwitz, claiming that she cited words that didn't exist and lied about the very same petition that had been secretly altered. That, of course, isn't true, and it absolutely did say those words initially, but now that they are gone, the worst people among us can claim that accurate reporting and accurate statements at the time are no longer accurate. It is, at its core, one of the worst types of psychological abuse and manipulation possible. Say something completely absurd, alter or hide that statement after the fact, and then admonish or tear down those who reacted to it as if they reacted to nothing at all, or some kind of fictionalized statement that you never said. Claim that they are the unhinged, unstable liars while distancing yourself from culpability. However, none of this even discusses the most obvious manipulation at play here. To its very core, the endeavor to deplatform this game for its message is flawed because it's not even out yet and has been pointedly referred to by the developers themselves as a project that makes a conscious effort to tell the story with respect. It turns out that more than 26 Iraqi civilians, as well as dozens of US military personnel, were consulted on their experiences in order to craft the narrative with a diversely represented perspective. The entire premise behind the narrative aimed at deplatforming this game hinges on it being disrespectful and harmful to the Iraqi people. But when consulting 26 different civilians and incorporating their input, that claim falls apart. There is by no means any sort of guarantee that it will be a flawlessly executed story arc, complete with perfect representation of all activist concerns and agenda points, but the development team have stated time and time again that it is not created with a political agenda in mind, and primarily aims to recreate tension, fear, or chaos represented in real-world conflict through design choices. In fact, the creative design lead Peter Tampt explicitly stated that it is highly unlikely players will come away from this game thinking we need more war, or internalizing a message that glorifies the concept. He actually said, quote, "I don't think that's something that the Marines and soldiers want as a message. I don't think that's something that the Iraqi civilians want as a message. I think people do need to understand the human cost of war." End quote. This flies directly in the face of current media headlines. It can be reminiscent of Spec Ops: The Line, which played out with morality and accusations of guilt in its narrative after players unknowingly commit a severe atrocity. The juxtaposition of feeling powerful as you rain down fire from the heavens only to realize you were the villain all along in that battle. It wasn't perfect, but it had a dimension to it that was able to transcend a typical atmosphere of haha, pew pew, bang bang. When we establish that video games are a form of artwork, and they are unequivocally artwork, we are forced to accurately understand what these people want, and what they want is for the government to ban artwork that they personally object to, even before they actually see what that artwork will eventually contain, and based largely on inaccurate lies about what that artwork is meant to show. They use doublespeak and false moral superiority to bludgeon anyone who disagrees, and even worse, they flat out change or remove the most flagrantly disingenuous accusations from their arsenal, only to turn around when you reference them as if you are the one who has lied. In a world where these types of campaigns are only ever becoming much more common, understanding how these people operate is critical. They attack you with skewed definitions. We want this thing to happen, but that doesn't mean what you think it means, even though by any rational definition, that's what we are saying. This thing is bad because it will cause X, Y, and Z to happen. But then it becomes, no, we never said X and Z. Why are you lying about our goals? They craft headlines that deliberately ignore context, and when their position is dissected, they claim marginalization and prejudice have fueled the fires that burn against them. To the very letter, these are psychological warfare tactics meant to destabilize the confidence and sanity of their opponents. Many of them might not even realize what that means, or that they do it day in and day out all the time, but much like an abusive relationship where one party manipulates the other into a position of self-doubt and discomfort for personal gain, social activists hell-bent on deplatforming 6 Days in Fallujah are perpetrating those very same tactics on a far greater scale. It remains to be seen whether or not the campaign will even work, but as it continues to grow in size, accurately describing what it is instead of succumbing to their double meanings and false definitions is the bedrock of eventually pushing them back, as they try to exact governmental censorship of unpublished artwork simply because they hold a largely untrue personal view of what it might eventually look like. All in all, the campaign against 6 Days in Fallujah has crossed a bevy of lines that should not be crossed at all, and those that position themselves as if they fight for inclusion and equality are now psychologically abusing those that disagree with them in the name of a cause that is factually untrue and flat out censorious, yet somehow they claim the moral high ground in this scenario. Don't let that stand. That's it. If you want to support, there are links down below, primarily Odyssey. If you want to try that out and sign up, it's a YouTube platform alternative that is very supportive of their creators. Also Locals, where $5 a month keeps me immune to YouTube policy changes and cancel culture outrage when it eventually comes for me, which it will. Also another YouTuber to check out, Surfshark, merch, social media, etc., but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.